I was 17 when my dad died of heart failure. I woke up that morning to the sound of my mom crying, and I knew right away what was wrong. He had been sick for years, and his own father had died the night before in the same way. According to my mom, my dad died with a smile on his face. At least his last moments may have been happy, because he was not a happy man in life. He was grumpy and mean, and the type who always had to get his way. I still loved him, but in all honesty, I was relieved when he died. He was blind and mentally ill. He was suffering the entire time I knew him. He smoked, listened to audiobooks, and told my brother and me stories. There wasn't much else. Where I live, there's a program where the blind can borrow audiobooks through the mail. The tapes are chipped so that they can only be played on the machines the program sends out. He never learned Braille, so when the tapes came in, I would sort them so he knew which was which, and read the information on the card to him, and then I'd send the old tapes back. All I had to do was turn the information card on the case over, bundle them with the rubber band, and stick them in the mailbox. The day after my dad passed, a bundle of tapes came in the mail. They were all his favorite authors. I don't know why I kept them for as long as I did, but a month after they came, I turned the card over and sent them back with a note that the man they were for was deceased. No more tapes came to that house, and no one asked for the player back. Even when things with my family went downhill, I was moving every few months trying to get stable. I held on to that machine. I got the first tape 2 years ago, just days after moving into the home I'm currently renting. It took a while to get on my feet, but I was finally living on my own with a stable job and a cheap little moped to get around town on. When I pulled the familiar gray case out of the mailbox, my first thought was the former tenant must have been blind. I took it inside, planning to write a note on the card like I did before, when I realized there wasn't a return address. I turned the card back over and blinked in confusion. My father's name was on the card. For some strange reason, my dead dad's name was on the card of the tape delivered to my address. I tried to contact the program to see what was up. They claimed not to have any record of sending it. After I badgered them for a couple of minutes, they asked which audiobook it was. I checked the card again and realized it didn't say. The cards were supposed to have the title, author, and narrator printed on the front, but there wasn't any of that. I told the person on the phone, and they sighed, told me they didn't send it, and hung up. Swearing, I opened the case, and a slip of paper fell out. I reached down to grab it, but before I could reach it, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. The call was from a hospital a few states away. My mother had been traveling with a carnival when she suffered a stroke. My older brother was missing in action and wanted nothing to do with her, so the next few months were full between taking care of my mother and trying to stay afloat financially. I forgot about the tape until 6 months later, when another came. Same situation. The card was addressed to my father with no return address. I tried to play the tape to see what was on it, but the machine wouldn't power on. The cord was broken, but it could also be powered by a battery. I told myself I would get some batteries, threw both tapes in the player into a drawer, and forgot about them. By then, my mother was as recovered as she might ever be. She couldn't live alone because she couldn't cook or drive, so I added her to the lease. I really didn't want to since we had been on bad terms before the stroke, but I couldn't bear to abandon her. Maybe I should have. A week ago, another tape came. I showed her the case, but she had no idea what it was. At first, I chalked it up to the memory loss she had been experiencing. The stroke hit her hard. She couldn't remember anything about me or our family for a long time, and she had trouble moving like she used to. Her limbs moved awkwardly, and she had to learn how to use her body all over again. I had to help her do pretty much everything at first, and in some ways, it felt like she had died, and the woman living with me wasn't my mother anymore. I went to the store yesterday and bought a pack of batteries. After my mother went to bed, I grabbed the tapes and the player and went to my bedroom. Maybe the tapes were similar to what my dad liked to listen to, and it would give her something to do during the day other than watch TV. I thought that maybe a story she had heard in passing would jog her memory. I put the batteries in the player and it powered on. Smiling, I grabbed one of the tapes and pushed it in, but no sound came out. The speakers were busted. Determined to finally find out more about these tapes and prove that I was right and the program had sent them, I dug out some headphones, plugged them in, and hit play. At first, all I heard was a soft sobbing and rustling. Did someone record over the book? It couldn't be an accident. Was someone messing with me? My brother? After a few seconds, a woman's voice screamed for help. I paused the tape. It sounded like my mother. Deciding that was ridiculous, I hit play. There were only a few minutes of audio on the tape. It sounded like someone running and screaming for help before being caught. I sat there while silence played for a few seconds, thinking how odd it was. Maybe it was an audio drama? Where were the credits? I swapped one tape for the next. This one was an entire audiobook about stroke victims. I sped through it, and it seemed to be a guide for family members. It went over recovery, support, anything a family member might want to know. I shook my head and moved on to the third tape. This one had only a few seconds of audio, but I listened to it over and over again, not really believing what I had heard. It was my parents talking. How had anyone caught this? Who would send it to me? Why go through the trouble of putting it on one of those specialty tapes? It must have been recorded during one of those nights where they would sit and talk about life. My mother asked, "Do you remember what color my eyes are?" My father replied, "Of course I do. My favorite shade of blue." It didn't make any sense. I knew it would bother me my whole life, but at the end of the night, I shoved the tapes and player back into the back of the closet. I didn't plan to ever dig them out again. If any tapes came, I would throw them back there with the rest without listening to them. This morning, I got up early. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I decided to clean the kitchen. I happened to knock a sauce bottle behind the fridge. Groaning, I pushed it forward a few inches and knelt to look for the bottle. I grabbed it and paused when I saw a slip of paper lying face up with a simple handwritten message. "Do you remember what color my eyes are?" I grabbed it and pushed the fridge back in place. I threw the note in the trash, hoping to forget about it. My mother woke up a few hours later. I brought her breakfast, and she thanked me. Her hand still shook as she lifted the spoon to her mouth. I couldn't help but notice that her eyes were brown. She's been watching TV in the living room. I told her I needed some documents for her tax paperwork, and looked through file folders and wallets for old IDs, a birth certificate, anything with eye color. I want to believe I'm being silly, that there's just no way the woman I've been living with and caring for isn't my mother. But every single document says blue.